Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live, how can businesses tackle climate change in a profit-sustainable way? We hear from one serial entrepreneur and unicorn founder on what we can do to reduce or completely eliminate our carbon footprint when building a company. Plus, Bitcoin hits a record high over the weekend. We'll break down what that means for you. All that next. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's March 15th, and here's a quick look at the top headlines trending right now on LinkedIn. Teachers nationwide are eligible for vaccine. Stripe becomes the US's most valuable startup, and Bitcoin fluctuates over the weekend. Let's take a deeper dive into that story. Bitcoin, the world's biggest cryptocurrency, hit record highs this weekend at almost 62,000. The weekend surge was followed by a drop this morning, sparking debate over the long-term value of the digital token. Joining us now to discuss is ABC News' Rebecca Jarvis. Rebecca, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Hi, thank you so much, Caroline. It's great to be here with you.
All right, so there's been tons of fluctuation. I'm eager to get your take. It was a record high this weekend. Now we're seeing it hit a low. Break down for us what's happening.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of speculation and a number of theories about what's really going on here in Bitcoin. But as you say, Saturday night, Bitcoin was almost $62,000 and it hit that record high. Shortly thereafter, there have been some significant liquidations on multiple different exchanges that trade Bitcoin. And the number that I'm seeing in a lot of places is $2.2 billion in Bitcoin liquidations. That has now pushed the price of Bitcoin down almost 10%, which is what we would think of as a correction. So it got as low as about $54,000, and now it's right in that range. Of course, if you go back a few years ago, even seeing Bitcoin at these heights, $54,000 would be considered dramatic. But in these last couple of days, we've really seen that significant decrease. But there are still big questions about the value of Bitcoin going forward. And of course, there are the evangelists, people like Elon Musk, like Mike Novogratz, who stand by Bitcoin, whether it's 54,000 or 61,000, because they see it as something that is going to the moon, much higher than where it is today.
And you talk about those questions, Rebecca, but I guess the biggest one is, are these gains sustainable? Retail investors are wondering, is this something that's going to continue to increase in value, or is this something that is going to plop again?
Well, the biggest argument here from the evangelists for why to buy into Bitcoin is that it is decentralized. That means it's not controlled by a particular government, and there is a limited supply of Bitcoin. In a time where we are creating more and more dollars and the rest of the world is creating more and more of their local currencies in order to deal with the pandemic, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are fixed. They're fixed in terms of the amount, and they're fixed in terms of who can ultimately control them. And if you are one who believes that as a result of that thesis that the demand will continue to increase for these assets, then you're certainly on the side of the bulls. There's the side that is still scratching its head trying to fully understand what the value of this asset is. And that side, of course, would be on the side of the bears. I think as somebody who is talking to broad audiences on Good Morning America, for example, the most important thing to consider here is that there is risk. If you're investing in Bitcoin, there is risk, and you have to be prepared, especially at these levels, which are heights that we have never seen before, to withstand some, at least at a minimum, near-term losses. Because again, record highs mean that it could go much lower as easily as it could go much higher.
Well, you mentioned those bulls, and there are some very big bulls putting their weight behind Bitcoin right now. You mentioned Elon Musk earlier in the segment. I'm curious, as a random retail investor, seeing someone like Elon Musk say, yeah, I'm going to put some of Tesla's stock into Bitcoin. How do you respond to that as someone who, maybe idolizes Elon, thinks of him as someone who should be looked up to, and is saying, yeah, this is something that I should put my money behind?
Well, it's an interesting theory on how to hedge risk as a company. Now, Tesla, of course, is an electric car company. Their major product is not Bitcoin. And yet, given the $1.5 billion in holdings that Tesla now has, it does lead some to question the business model itself. Why, as a businessman, Elon Musk would go there. I would just say that at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway, whether you're 100% all in on Elon Musk and the Bitcoin story, or you're just looking at this as a bystander, is to just recognize that there is risk attached to this and to do your homework and do your research before piling into the trade. I think too much of the time in a moment like this, we turn to influencers, we turn to the names of people who we respect and hold up in a higher light. And we just assume that because they're doing something that we should be doing that same thing. And I'm not saying whether you should or you shouldn't. I just think at the end of the day, the most important thing that you can do for yourself is know why you're making a decision with your money. If you choose to put money in or you choose not to put money in, know why you're making that decision.
Well, speaking of homework and research, Rebecca, you've been hard at work at another financial story that's been rocking the headlines, which is the GameStop story. A documentary launches today on Hulu about GameStop that you worked on. What did you find? I'm so curious about this story, and where are we now with GameStop?
Well, what's wild is that the story isn't over. You still have GameStop shares very much in the headlines. The company's stock was up pre-market today. It was down pre-market today. It is back close to where it was, near the record highs. This is, of course, a company that about 8 months ago, was about $4 a share, and now we're more in the range of 300. So it's a company that went being worth a couple million to being worth multiple billions worth of dollars. And we trace in GameStop, our documentary that is streaming exclusively on Hulu now, we trace just how this phenomenon has played out. You know, there was this initial group on Reddit in the community Wall Street Bets that got really interested in GameStop, in part because of a person named Keith Gill. He goes by a name on Reddit that I can't say here on this program, but it's deep bleeping value. And he's the guy who originally spotted GameStop as being a potential investment for individuals, both because of what he saw as the long-term potential for this company, but also because of what he saw as a vulnerability. There were major hedge funds that were so short this company that they had really backed themselves into a corner and put themselves in a situation where there could be a gigantic short squeeze if there was a lot of buying in the stock. And we traced how the Wall Street Bets community got together, realized, in part because of Keith's work, they realized that they could have an advantage if they all worked in concert with each other towards pushing this stock up. They also invited, because of the fact that GameStop became such a phenomenon and was up 1,700% in the span of a handful of days, because of that, it invited all of these additional concentric circles of people who hadn't done research, who really weren't in on the Wall Street Bets conversation, to get involved as well. Even my own dentist at one point in this whole thing asked me if he should be buying shares of GameStop. And so we trace that hysteria and we look at what that means for investing going forward. How, and in many cases, I spoke to a number of hedge fund managers and people who are participants in the market, how this will shape Wall Street going forward. And it will have an impact on Wall Street going forward. GameStop is the poster child for all of this, but there are a number of other stocks, AMC, BlackBerry, Koss, so many companies that have been meme stocks and are a part of this wild mania and phenomenon that we're seeing play out.
Well, Rebecca, that question that your dentist asked you, I actually asked my producers in advance of the show. So I won't get your take. I won't ask you that. We don't do investment advice here on LinkedIn News Live, but I've asked that same question about GameStop. Rebecca, before I let you go, quick take. The reason I love this story is that it does span Wall Street to Main Street. Yeah. What was the most surprising interview that you did for this documentary?
I think for me, one of the biggest surprises, because I spoke to dozens of members of Wall Street Bets, it was to really get inside how organized they were on Wall Street Bets and how many conversations took place in the run-up to what was this epic short squeeze. And that to me was really fascinating because I think we hear so much in this moment, especially in the pandemic, how organizing with LinkedIn, with various social media outlets, how big of a role that plays in shaping our world. And in this case, you have that organization shaping the outcome of a stock and even more broadly, potentially the stock market. Hedge funds are taking this seriously. They are following the conversation now that's happening on Reddit, that's happening on Wall Street Bets, and it's not going away. And even though we've seen things like this before, I covered the internet bubble and paid attention back then, and I'm a student of history. Yes, there were chat boards back then, but now people have this technology in their hands that gives them so much access. And they are a force that we have to take seriously now in the markets.
And a force that I'm excited to stream on Hulu this evening. I can't wait to watch the documentary GameStop. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you, Caroline. It was great to be here.
That was Rebecca Jarvis of ABC News. You can catch GameStop on Hulu streaming live starting today. And for more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. What's it like to launch a unicorn startup valued at more than $1 billion, only to pick up and try to do it all over again? Julia Collins is the former founder of Zoom, a robotics-focused pizza startup. Her latest venture, Planet Forward, has raised $2.7 million for climate-friendly food at a time when thinking sustainably about what we eat has never been more important. She joins us now on LinkedIn News Live. Julia, hello. How are you?
Hi, Caroline. Nice to be here.
It's great to see you. All right, so let's start with the big C, crackers. Moonshot launched recently. Why, when you think about sustainable food, why start with crackers? I'm a big cracker fan myself, but want to know why you started there.
Well, I was super inspired by snacks as a category. Snacks are a $605 billion global category, and a category that we saw continuing to grow and blossom during the pandemic. And so I really wanted to create a product that would have a lot of access to everyday consumers. And so starting in snacks made a lot of sense. When we thought about the universe of snacks that we could create, I was very focused on actually sourcing from farmers that were using regenerative agriculture practices. And so the reason why we started with crackers is we connected with a great group of wheat farmers that were using the kind of practices that help to rebalance the natural carbon cycle, rebuild the health of the soil, and actually create more resilient farm systems.
Regenerative agriculture. I'm going to go ahead and venture a bet that not a lot of people joining us in the stream know what that is. What is it, and why is it so important to climate change and sustainable food?
Yeah, the relationship between the health of our food systems and the health of our climate is really, really important. 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions right now are coming from land use and food systems. So the reason why so many of us who are deeply involved in food systems reimagination are excited about regenerative agriculture is it's an approach to farming that helps to rebuild the health of our soil. And in the process of rebuilding this soil, it also regenerative agriculture can restore the natural carbon cycle. So drawing excess carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil and in the above ground biomass. So at scale, regenerative agriculture can be one of the levers that we use in our fight against climate change.
And historically, this technique is Black and Indigenous in terms of its history and the way that it responds to the system. Why aren't these systems more adopted widely in terms of how we build food? Why isn't this something that everyone does?
There were centuries ago when this was the way everyone farmed. For example, as you mentioned, when Native Americans were in charge of land stewardship in our country, we saw healthy, rich soil all across the ecosystem. As you mentioned, Black farmers have been using these practices. Asian American farmers have been using these practices. We saw, sort of post-war, what we call the Green Revolution. This was a time when we were concerned on a global level about food security. And so we started to use nitrogen-based inputs, heavy farming equipment, and other sort of methods to boost yields, crop yields in our country. And this had the unintended consequence of completely disrupting the carbon cycle and degrading our soil. So what we're seeing now is a return to the old and pulling away from some of these kinds of farming practices that are incredibly bad for our environment.
Well, Julia, I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream right now. We have Stephen from New Jersey, Iran from Reno, Morgan from Nigeria, and Samuel from Ohio. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. Julia, I'm curious. I feel like a lot of people are having a hard time right now doing anything, but you've started this new venture amid a pandemic. What was that like trying to build this business during this crisis that we're facing right now?
You know, at the core of any business is the people. And, you know, people who are passionate about climate change are passionate about action no matter what's happening in the world. And I think Planet Forward has had a really big advantage in being able to hire and attract some of the best people on the planet. And so for us, it was really a matter of just focusing on our mission and making sure that we stayed the course, even in the midst of so much upheaval and disruption.
And I want to zoom out a little bit, no pun intended, to your previous work with Zoom. And any lessons from that startup that you brought into Planet Forward?
I think for me, just the experience of being a founder is different this time around. You know, I learned so much over the course of that experience at Zoom Pizza. And one of the things that I really learned was that to be a really good founder and to be a really good leader, you have to take really good care of yourself. And so this time around, Caroline, I'm a lot more focused on just self-care, around centering myself, around taking really good care of my physical and mental well-being, because I think that you know, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And so the big lesson I learned was to really invest in myself.
And I feel like a lot of people probably joining us in the stream right now feel like they're sprinting right now, whether they're trying to launch a startup or just get through their day job. Mental health is something that we talk a lot about here on LinkedIn News Live. How are you maintaining your mental health? Any tips or tricks? Because I sure would love some.
Oh my goodness. You know, I begin every day with meditation and with breath work. You know, I begin every day in the same way. And that really helps me to just stay open to the possibilities of the day, just really beginning by centering myself. And then in the evening times, I really pour into my family. I spend lots of time with my partner and our son. I enjoy cooking at home. And so I really try to bookend my day with really good intention in the morning and really good connection in the evening. And apart from that, I'd say working on a company that is so incredibly meaningful, that is completely in line with my sort of purpose on the planet, really does create a lot more joy in my work.
And I want to talk a little bit more about Planet Forward. I see that 99% of the people who invested in the seed round were women and people of color, populations that have historically just been left out of the investment cycle altogether. Why was that important to you to make sure that there was a diverse population investing in your company?
Yeah, so 99% of the investors in my $2.7 million seed prime were women and people of color. You know, now I'm $5.2 million into my raise, and still the majority of my investors are people who would categorize themselves as diverse. You know, ultimately, I'm in the business of creating value. You know, I'm creating value for my customers. I'm creating value for my investors, for my employees. And because I really care a lot about equity and justice, I want to be creating value for the entire ecosystem of humans, not just the ones who traditionally have access to all of the venture capital outcomes. So it was really important to me to think about diversity, not just from a perspective of how I hire, but also from a perspective of how I think about my cap table.
And you were on Sand Hill Road well before we've seen this just reckoning against systemic racism that is now commonplace in terms of our conversations. Are things really changing in the venture capital community? Do you see progress in terms of the number of people, the types of people who are able to access this type of capital?
Progress is happening, but it's moving too slowly. I think I was really optimistic that we would see faster change, particularly in the wake of the action that we saw around George Floyd last year. And I think it's just happening too slowly. I will tell you that there are glimmers of hope. Goldman Sachs' announcement about their $10 billion initiative supporting Black female entrepreneurs is certainly one of those glimmers of hope. I think the growth of female-focused funds and funds focused on Black entrepreneurs is encouraging. I'm encouraged by GPs like Sarah Kunst, like Jen and Marin at January Ventures. So we certainly see more that's happening, but it's just not happening fast enough.
How do we expedite the progress? As an ally here who's just glimmering for more glimmers of hope, you mentioned some of the initiatives that are happening right now, but in your mind, in your experiences raising capital, what needs to change?
Each of us has a unique role to play, and some of us are in a position to write checks as investors, and so we should write those checks. Some of us are in a position to think about creating more diversity on our cap tables as founders, and so we should do that. But some of us are operators, some of us are engineers, and I think for folks in those categories, I urge you to go and seek out a diverse founder and go and work for them. Lend some of your talent to these organizations that need you. Ultimately, the way that we really make change is by ensuring that more diverse founders and diverse fund managers are successful with their companies. And that certainly means investing in them, but it can also mean going to work for them.
And speaking of success in companies, Planet Forward is tackling climate change, which is one of the meatiest problems that I think a founder could take on right now. How did you get on this path? Why is this something that's important to you?
As I mentioned earlier in the call, 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from land use and food systems. And as somebody who has really spent my career working at the intersection of food and technology, I just got really committed. At first, I actually felt very angry about the magnitude of the problem. And then that anger really spurred action. And I decided that I wanted to use everything that I had learned in the world of food and technology to really apply it to the problem. Climate change is not just an urgent crisis. It is actually an existential threat. It is something that could cause, for it to be impossible for humans to continue to live on our planet. So I can't actually think of a more important thing to work on than tackling climate change. I will say also that there really is no social justice without climate justice. Climate change will disproportionately affect the folks who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And we are already seeing that with desertification happening across the planet. And so really, I think the thing that I hope happens is that more and more people decide to focus their energies on tackling climate change in their own lives and in their own businesses.
And Julie, I'm seeing many members joining us in this stream right now, and they're probably asking, how can I impact climate change? This is such a big issue. I as an individual, what can I do? And is buying your crackers, is that something that really does have an impact in terms of your ability and your footprint on the planet?
Yeah, the reason why we created Moonshot Snacks is because we wanted to help people understand their connection to the climate action movement, and thinking about what you can do in your daily life to make a difference. So choosing snacks and products that are sourced from regenerative ingredients, that are carbon neutral, that's a great place to start. Reducing food waste at home, making sure that your municipality supports composting. Those are great places to start. Growing your own food, at least a portion of it, is a really great place to start. And then when you sort of expand that circle beyond your household to sort of the next sphere, think about within your organization, within your company, what initiatives you can put forward that would actually cause your company to make a difference. So can you motivate the leadership of your organization to make a commitment to being carbon neutral? Not just carbon neutral by buying offsets, but carbon neutral by actually reducing their impact. And I think if we see these things happening at the individual level and at the company level, then we really have got a shot at getting this done.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm going to take some of those action steps as we finish this interview. We can all have our part. We don't have to launch a $1 billion company to do it like Julia did, but we can all have our part. So thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Thanks so much, Caroline.
That was Julia Collins. She's the founder and CEO of Planet Forward. All right, tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, I'll be sitting down with Bon Appetit Editor-in-Chief Dawn Davis. We'll talk to her about her career path and what she's doing to ensure an equitable workplace at her organization. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.